On the podcast today, we're going to talk about chakras, and this is a topic in Eastern philosophy that's often misunderstood because a lot of people hear about chakras through New Age teachings and
New Age interpretation.
New Age interpretations. And I've made a few videos on this in the past, as you know, and I've tried to explain the authentic way to understand chakras, and that's what we'll speak about today. But we also have to talk about what chakras aren't. So when people hear about chakras as like, you know, this energy that you've harnessed, or I'm living in the heart chakra and this and that, this is not the actually authentic way of understanding it. And though I'm not discounting, someone may not live in the heart, but that's not what chakras are. Like chakras, in the end, are psychoenergetic centers within our being, or psychological centers, as Joseph Campbell would put it. And so it's the way we think about energy is different in the chakra philosophy, because it's about the energy of your psychology. What psychological state are you in? It's got nothing to do about like vibrating on top of a mountain and all of these things that have came about.
Yeah, I think a lot of people tend to associate that with like kind of trance state of consciousness, like that kind of a trance field. So that's how they, I think, make a relationship with the chakras, but that's not what really is.
That's not what it is at all. Yeah. Well, has happened to a lot of paths, right? Like even Shaivism, people will go to trance festivals and think that the path of Shaivism or Shiva has something to do with being out of your mind, but it's not at all. Like, and that would be very odd to say to an ascetic in India or a sadhu or someone like that. They wouldn't really understand what you're talking about, because that's like not what it is.
Yeah, that's complete misunderstanding.
It's a misunderstanding. Yeah. So to understand chakras properly, we need to first understand Kundalini and Prana. And so, again, Kundalini is something completely misunderstood, right? So Kundalini, people think that their Kundalini explodes out of their head and they're, again, vibrating, they're in trance and this and that. That's not what it is. It's essentially Kundalini is translated as the coiled up one, and it's coiled up in the coccyx bone at the base of our spine.
Yeah, the very bottom of the spine.
Yeah. So it's like a dormant energy. And so that, you could say Kundalini is just like when you awaken that serpent, that's like the awakened consciousness. So there are those who have awoken their consciousness, and there are those who just are ordinary, mundane people who haven't awoken their consciousness, right? So that's kind of the world that we live in. But there are differing degrees to that awakening, so to speak. You know, they talk about that in Zen Buddhism and other traditions as well. So yeah, that is kind of that dormant energy, and that Kundalini is what goes up the Sushumna Nadi, the central pathway in the spine, and what travels up and down between the chakras, which is something we'll talk about in a minute. But that's kind of what Kundalini is in a nutshell, right? It's that.
And I also wanted to mention that, like, we see in the Indian art that, there's sadhu and there's cobra beside the sadhu.
Yes.
So the coiled up snake is like that Kundalini, that dormant energy, right?
Yes.
And then, like, as sadhu blows a flute, and the cobra kind of comes up out, and then dance, and so that's more so like a symbolize that slowly waking up, awakening the consciousness,
exactly,
type of thing.
Even when you see the art of, like, even when you see Patanjali, right?
Yeah.
Patanjali is, in some symbols, is resting on a coiled up serpent, and the serpent comes out from the top. You see that even with some art with the Buddha as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, these themes will overlap with a lot of Indic traditions. But that's a really good point, because that's like the sadhu is awakening the serpent, and you know, it's symbolic, right? It's awakening the serpent within yourself. So, and we'll talk about, you know, how to do that a little bit later. But so when we talk about like what we mentioned, like a central pathway, we have to talk then about prana, right? So prana, vital force, or if you're familiar with Taoism, chi is actually prana and chi are actually the same. They're just we're talking about Sanskrit as opposed to Chinese. So the understanding is the same, though there are different methods and so forth and so on. But when you actually look at the nadis and the meridians of the body and this and that, they're very similar when you look at both Taoism and if you look at yoga, for example.
Yeah, like in Chinese medicine kind of thing. Yeah,
yes.
The meridians and...
Yeah. Yeah, same if you look at Ayurveda, right? If you look at Ayurveda and they look at the nadis and that, like a proper Ayurvedic doctor and one who understands the psychosomatic organism. It's very similar, like as in Chinese medicine. So the nadis, the central pathways and that the meridians are all, you could say, the same from Indic thought as opposed to Chinese thought. And so the prana is the prana is like the vital force of our being, right? That energy moves through our nervous system, through the meridians, and through our neural network.
Yeah, so our nervous system and also those meridians are the one that carries the energy, that prana, right?
Yes.
That's why when we go to get like a Chinese massage or something, they rub you in the right point to get that, block the energy, go through or hold through your body, right? Yes. That's why after that session you feel like a different person. You feel so good, right? That's also that's why we like for thousands of years. People have been practicing Hatha Yoga and Qigong, Tai Chi, this type of practice because of that very reason, right? To get that vital force, that energy flowing through the body as it should.
Yes.
Yes. So that's why these sincere spiritual practitioners have been practicing these things for a very long time for that very reason. And obviously from doing so, that helps our mind to be calm and clean and helps the consciousness.
Yes, of course, yeah. Well, that's why Hatha Yoga, like because we're talking about the chakras, Hatha Yoga is kind of a prerequisite when we talk about if you are very sincere about chakra philosophy and also about yoga in general. It's not saying that Jnana Yoga and these other parts of yoga are not valid, but Hatha Yoga, as you were saying with Tai Chi Chuan and like Qigong and other methods in China, they're about keeping that pranic flow, that chi through the body, just moving freely without having any blockages and this and that. And that's important because like all of the prana and all of the energy condenses in our mind, right? And that becomes our psychological state. And that determines the chakra that you actually live on. It's a holistic system, right? Because we're talking about not just the brain here. We're talking about the body as the brain, but the energy condenses here. It's like what Rudolf Steiner said when you talk about the upside. Like he mentioned, we are like an upside down tree. Because if you look at the nervous system and the meridians, it all kind of goes like this.
Yeah, from top to bottom. Right?
So what you're doing is you're taking in experience through your limbs and through your eyes and ears, and the energy is condensing in your brain, in your mind, and so that then determines your psychological state.
Yeah, so that then we can definitely say the Hatha Yoga and this Chinese martial art practice has direct input to elevate your energetic level, as in chakra as well, right?
Of course, of course. And but that's why they practice. Well, that's one of the reasons why they practice, right? So they practice because of that reason. And so the more you practice, the more it's easier for you to reside on higher chakras, like instead of lower chakras, like.
Well, definitely, we all want to reside on upper chakra rather than the bottom.
The bottom, So that's kind of we had to explain that before we get into the chakras because people often wonder like how the energy moves between the chakras, right? And people think about, and this is another thing in New Age thought that they've got wrong, and I explained it on that video a few years ago about chakras, that people think that they're like you step the levels of chakras, right, and then you are done with that level of the chakra. And so people think, I'm on the heart chakra now. And it's almost like they think of it like a computer game, like you go through levels and
next level and achieve next level,
yes,
so that you don't go back down.
Yes.
Kind of very linear style of thinking, isn't it? Like that resembles just the way we think nowadays.
Yes.
But that's not how the real traditional chakra system works.
No, and that's a Western linear model.
Yeah.
It's not an Eastern non-linear model, like because in India it's understood that you ebb and flow between chakras all the time. Your psychological state is ebbing and flowing between, like, you know, higher and lower states, and like depending on life experiences, you might be in a real bad way for a long time and you reside on lower chakras and so forth and so on.
And that also sounds like, again, since we're talking about chakra as in like psychological centers and psychosomatic centers, that it has a direct connection between our psychological level, right? Or that becomes very obvious then. Like we were talking about the wheel of samsara framework, for example, like karma, there is samskara, vasanas, and karma. Like more we cleanse out our vasanas, higher we can get to the higher centers of chakras as well, yes, right? Yes. And again, that also changes, depends on your like energetic level, like your psychological level. Yeah, it completely depends on that, and it alternates from place to place, basically.
Yes, that's right. So, well, that's why that's important, right? Like, so the wheel of samsara framework, like if your samskaras are just accumulating and influencing your vasanas and your karma,
then it'll be hard to get out of the lower three chakras, right?
Almost impossible.
Yeah.
Almost impossible to get out of the lower three.
And even if you were to be in a very heightened state of consciousness, so you may reside upper 4 chakras, for example, but then you fall back into all your old habits and things like that, so that you kind of keep residing your own thoughts, and then you might step back down to lower 3 chakras.
Well, that's why most of humanity live in the 2nd and 3rd chakra. And we'll speak a bit more about that later, but most of humanity live in the 2nd and 3rd chakra, when most of us, we need to elevate and live in the 4th and 5th. Now, the 6th and 7th is another conversation that, you know, we'll get into later. But for the health and sanity of humanity, living in the 4th and 5th chakra is important.
Heart and the throat.
Yeah, the Vashuda and the Anahata. And so, but the 2 and 3 is where most of us live, and we will get into that. Yeah. But yeah, that's what we really need to understand. There is not this linear approach to the chakras. It's the, you know, like what you mentioned with samskaras, there's so many things that are determining where you reside in the chakra system, right? So obviously external input, but also how you are oriented towards yourself within, you know, like, are you doing spiritual work within yourself? Are you practicing self-inquiry or mindfulness or something like this? And are you purging out certain, you know, negative traits about yourself? And
how much like sincere practice that you put in for yourself.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it is a system that will reveal if you are actually doing the work or not, you know what I mean? So, so in saying all that, we should get into the first chakra. So make sure you guys watch all the way to the end, or listen all the way to the end, because we're going to go through each of the 7 main chakras.
And we get into
crown chakra. And then we're all going to blow out of our crown chakra. So the first chakra is the Muladhara. Yeah. Now we could say that's the translate that as the root base chakra, the root base, the root chakra, which is located in the perineum. So this chakra kind of is, well, I shouldn't say self-explanatory, but it is self-explanatory when you understand the chakras, right? Mm-hmm. So, and it's more to do with when life is just, there's no joy in life, right? This psychological state is what you would say is grim, dogged existence, like
completely living in illusion of attachment, I think.
Yes.
Because that's like a Muladhara is what that like holding on to something like, and stay in that state as long as you don't want to make any change, right?
Yes. It's like they use the gripping analogy for the Muladhara. So you're holding on and you're kind of like, you're in a complete dualistic world, like, you know, and I would say even that from a psychological state, like depression and suicidal tendencies and so forth and so on are related to the Muladhara. They're related to that chakra because it's like it's a psychological state of there's a lack of joy, there's a lack of like vitality in life,
and almost like the individual allow outside influence to determine who they are. Completely, right?
Yes.
So there is no like an inner power to fight that sort of thing.
Well, for example, if an individual knew the higher chakras, they would never have suicidal tendencies, they would never be depressed, because they would not have bought into this idea of, you know, the world is out there and I am here. You know, that's a big contributor to depression, right? Like this cognitive error that we have where we feel like we're disconnected from the world. And unfortunately, those people who suffer from that have just bought into that sort of illusion that they're not part of the world. Maybe because they have bad relationships and so forth and so on. They just don't know enough people who are caring, you know what I mean? And they fall into that psychological state of that of the lowest chakra. So I shouldn't say lowest chakra, of the Muladhara chakra. It's a chakra that we've probably all experienced once upon a time in our life. But that's what it is, right? That's the energy of that chakra. So the next chakra is the Schwarzschild. The Schwarzschild. So the Schwarzschild chakra.
The hardest one
to pronounce in Sanskrit. So that's the sacral chakra. And actually, when you look at the sacral chakra, it's actually, you can translate that as her favorite resort. And there's always these interesting ways of that, you know, it's like in Chinese, right? There's interesting ways that in Chinese they express certain things, same as in Sanskrit.
Just to accentuate the meaning.
So in the Swarasthana, it's the pleasure chakra, right? The sacral chakra. It's kind of located in the genitalia.
It's a sexual organ.
Organs, yes.
So it's just basically kind of pleasure, more like a primal animalistic sort of instinct, that sort of behavior.
Yes. In Sanskrit, they pleasure is kama. So Kama, not karma, kama. And kama is actually an important principle in Hindu philosophy and in yoga. And so at that level, our psychology is Freudian, right? So so
we would purely just depend on from that organ. Like if you get I don't know, if you feel flat, if you want some vibrant in life, and you think from that place, and you would behave accordingly, right? So, and like you mentioned, Freudian. Freud often made a lot of problem in relation to sexual suppression, right? So that center, that's where he was talking about.
Yes. Because for Freud, it's like sex is the primary drive of life, but also the great frustration for Freud.
Right.
And so that's kind of what that chakra is. The Schwarzschild chakra is, because you're operating from that pleasure principle. And so that controls all fantasies, it controls all things that, in some sense, it contributes to the imaginative faculty, because, you know, we've all fantasized about certain things sexually and so forth and so on. Everyone would have done that in their life once upon a time.
Definitely.
Some people dwell on that a lot because they live on the Swarasthana chakra. So that is that pleasure principle that binds us to pleasure itself.
Yeah.
Not just sex, it's also about trying to experience pleasure. You will see this, that a lot of people who are addicted to foods and so forth and so on, they actually live on the Swarasthana chakra because they're addicted to gaining pleasure from some sort of sustenance, right?
So like more people who can't fight over their cravings,
yes,
right? More so, whatever. Your sense organs always crave for something, and you can't overcome it, and you get to more reside in that chakra.
Yeah, you're possessed basically by the pleasure principle. You're possessed by karma, because you're possessed by just trying to accumulate pleasure, but at the expense of you're suppressing your own pain, right? So this is the problem with the Swarasthana chakra, because you're not dealing with. This is why it's so easy to alternate between the Muladhara and the Swarasthana, because you can try and accumulate as much pleasure as you want, but if you're masking a lot of pain, then you can just go back down to the Muladhara chakra, because you're just masking pain. And when you're masking pain, what happens? You can often become depressed all of a sudden, and mood swings and so forth and so on. And so that's it then, you know what I mean? It's over for you. But you'll have to get yourself out of it. But getting yourself out of that state is not to do with pleasure. But that's the kind of the world that we've created for ourselves, right? To seek pleasure and avoid pain is the nature of the world. This is why I said the second and third chakra is where most people reside, and we'll get into the third chakra in a minute. But that's the nature of it, right?
That's to show how obvious what reason why a mukbang thing in Korea. I assume many of our listeners might already know that they have this a tons of food, and they just eat for 6 hours.
Yeah, can't be good for your ticker.
And it's streaming live, and apparently it's super popular.
Yeah, millions of people watching.
Yeah,
I know. What do they get out of it?
That spicy noodle eating thing, I don't get it.
You couldn't imagine the toilet the next day, could you?
Oh my God.
Horrific.
But then viewership is the millions of views, and you're oh. But like you said, that's most people reside in the bottom two chakras. That's a obvious reflection of that.
Yes. Well, if you look at what's popular, what is the popular content on YouTube? What is the popular content on YouTube? Food content, and also how people look. So makeup stuff for women, workout stuff for guys, and stuff like that, and girls as well. But that's the most popular content on YouTube. Educational content is not. Yeah. And that also reflects, even though the algorithm is working against you, but that kind of reflects that second chakra where people are.
Yeah, that just activates that primal behavior, isn't it?
Yes.
Seeking pleasure, seeking attention, all these type of things.
Yes.
To make yourself feel that you're important, all these type of things, right?
Yeah. So again, you're just masking pain. You're masking pain. You're trying to. You're consuming things that are giving you a sense of pleasure. You're on, what do they call it? The hedonic treadmill. Where you're just constantly seeking the next, experience of pleasure.
Yeah.
To mask your own personal problems, things that you probably have to address immediately psychologically, and there's no way we can go into the higher chakras if we don't deal with a lot of, especially shadow content, and just ways of behavior, like you said with the samskaras. Your vasanas and your karma will never change if you're not working on that subconscious level, And so, obviously, meditation is good to work on that subconscious level, but that's also why Hatha Yoga also came about too, because you're working on the sensory level of your body in the same way that you work on the sensory level of your psychosomatic organism in Vipassana. but you're doing it in different ways, right? So Hatha yoga, you're practicing postures, which has a way of dealing with the samskaras and a way of dealing with the sensory aspect of yourself, which gets down into the subconscious level. Same as in vipassana, but the methods are different. So with vipassana, you're using just awareness. You're using your awareness of the sensory level.
You're sitting in stillness meditation.
Stillness and meditation. But with Hatha yoga, you're kind of going full blast and stretching your body out to iron out those samskaras and getting down deep into the subconscious realm. So now we come to the third chakra, the Manipura. The Manipura chakra, which is located actually at the navel, or you could say kind of loosely the solar plexus, would kind of be the similar location to the lower dantian if you practice Qigong or Tai Chi or any form of martial arts. And the Manipura is translated as the city of the shining jewel. Now, this chakra is to do with the Artha principle in Sanskrit, which is the power principle, right? So you have the second chakra, which is pleasure, the third chakra, which is the will to power, or even related to, in some sense, self-interest, self-preservation, greed, excess. So basically, on this chakra, you're consuming everything. And it's ironic that because it is to do with excess and greed, and its focus is on consuming as much as you can to gain an upper hand for oneself. It's located in the belly, right? So it's kind of ironic that the belly is where this chakra resides. It's the energy of the belly. So that's where it is. So the power principle is all about here. So when you think about the Artha principle and power, you think about world leaders, politicians. They dwell on, let's say that not just they dwell on this, but they've become a master of that chakra. They've harnessed its energy better than you and I and everyone else watching.
I think a bit like this. They worked hard enough to get through the first and second chakra, and they finally arrived in third, and they thought that, this is it. This is for me. And I stay here.
Stay here.
Make my wealth as big as I can.
I know we're only speaking sort of symbolically, but the thing is that because their psychology is focused on power, they know nothing. They haven't experienced the higher chakras, right? No. And that's what happens, and that's why I mentioned earlier that most people dwell in the second and third chakra in the world, because, most of our focus is on seeking pleasure or the drive to succeed and be somebody and have influence, even in subtle ways too. We're not just talking about politicians. It can happen in families. It can happen in relationships. This principle dwells in life.
And I think now it exists in a social media platform. More followers you have, more likes you get, and more influence you can give more people.
Yes.
Then you're a powerful individual.
Yeah. Right? Well, that's what it is, right? So you're trying to gain influence, which means you are trying to harness power. That's what you're doing, and so if you dwell too much on this chakra, then that becomes your focus in life. This is where, so for example, if you think about the crazy entrepreneur who's just focused on gaining followers, gaining influence, they are possessed and dwell in the Manipura chakra. That's where they dwell. And they don't know anything about higher chakras.
And I think a lot of those entrepreneurs must have started their business or whatever they were doing at a very innocent motivation, right? Because there's something they're passionate about or something, and once they tasted a little success, and little success lead to the next bigger success, and they get addicted to this achievement, right? And then, they search for more power and more success, more money, and so that you kind of don't get to be out of that chakra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the danger, see, because your psychological state becomes that chakra. They just don't know. It's not that they're bad people. It's not that they just dwell in that and they think that that's the world. That's why when you take those people out of their comfort zones, which is that sphere of power and influence, and you put them into more humble environments where people are very, heart-centered, for example, then it really humbles them, and they really gain something from that, and they not intellectually, but they might intuitively feel that, hey, there's another way of actually being in the world than just being a grubby person trying to accumulate wealth from people and influence and control people and nations and so forth and so on. So that's the danger, right? It's that you can just dwell in that state, that psychological state, for way too long.
It almost seems like that for a lot of these successful people in the world may have resided upper chakra before they became who they became.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then once they got to taste this power, and they just step back down to that, that chakra.
Yes. Yeah, it can work like that, definitely. It can work like that.
Yeah.
And it can definitely work the other way around too. It can work that, they might have been in a bad psychological state and they're trying to get themselves out of it, and their way of getting themselves out of it is trying to gain fame and fortune.
Yeah.
As opposed to being like just a good human being in general, right? So yeah, exactly. Like what you were saying, it can work that way too. Like, because you can get sucked into a psychological state where you're focused on trying to harness and accumulate a certain way of life for yourself. It has a lot to do with evolution, because you're talking about self-preservation here. So what's a good method for self-preservation is to make yourself seem like you have value to the world.
That's right.
Through influence and so forth and so on. Like you said with social media, right? If someone's getting more likes on social media, they're often considered an expert over an actual expert. And so that's that sort of economy of social media, where you have that power principle, artha, imbued in that field. So another thing I wanted to mention about this chakra is that it's kind of that the psychology of this chakra is kind of Nietzschean and Adlerian, right? It's completely Nietzschean and Adlerian, because meaning that we want to consume and gain power for oneself, right? That's the essence of this chakra. So the artha principle in Sanskrit is basically the drive to succeed without a consideration for your actions. It doesn't have to mean that, but it can mean that, right? So,
yeah, well, gain success at all costs.
Yes, gain success at all costs, 100%, and that's the nature of that principle. And so, to kind of recap those three chakras is that. So the second chakra, Freud believes sex is the primary urge, right? In the second chakra. And the third chakra is the will to power is the primary urge, is the defining thing. But Indians, actually in Indian philosophy, don't argue with this, because they say karma and artha, that's actually the way it is. They are the primary urges. But the thing is, and what Freud and I'm not so sure about Adler, but what Freud didn't understand is that these urges, and if we look at it from the chakra system, can be overcome. You're not bound to...
So do you think those scholars kind of, they were blind spot on that side?
Yeah, 100%.
That, in fact, that we can overcome.
We can overcome. Well, if you look at it from the perspective of the chakra philosophy, and if you look at it from yoga or Vedanta, or even if you look at it from Taoism, of course you can overcome. Even Buddhism, the nature of those systems is that you can overcome those primal urges.
That's right.
You know, that's why they have the system in the first place,
that's
right?
Right. That's exactly right. That's why that's a mind science.
It's a mind science, yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
100% it's a mind science. And so the great Indian spiritual masters agree with what Freud and Adler would be saying, but they don't agree in the sense that they can't be overcome, you know, because they can be overcome through extensive spiritual practice, self-observation, you know, self-inquiry, so forth and so on. Go down the line as much as you want. So those lower 3 chakras are oriented towards the external world, right? Like what you mentioned with the Muladhara, right? There's the gripping, the sense of duality. That's what defines those lower 3 chakras, is the belief in duality, the belief that my life depends on something I gain from the external world.
That's right. Something, outside, something objective and physical.
Yes.
Materialistic.
Yes. So all of our joy and all of our happiness depends on what happens out here.
Yeah, they purely identify their own being through outside.
Through outside,
right?
yeah.
The strong identification of a person and environment that you are in.
And it's pretty obvious too, right?
Family, jobs, and possessions.
And it's pretty obvious, right? Like, because if you look at Manipura is the power. So trying to, you know, be the coolest kid in the class. And then Schwarzschild is about, you know, experiencing all of the pleasure in the world. And then Muladhara is
pure attachment.
Pure attachment and pure grief, basically, like a lack of joy. So then you have like this external model that, now, not many live in the Muladhara, because if a lot of people lived in the Muladhara, then there'd be a lot of people taking their own life all the time, and it'd be just...
It's going to be a very sad world.
Sad world, yeah. But in saying that, it can be deemed a sad world too, because most people live in the second and third, right? So then we have to then think about what is after the third chakra, and so we're kind of, in a sense here, you're moving your attention away from the external world when you get out of those 3 psychological energies, states, and you start to turn inward, right? And so, like what you mentioned with the politicians and so forth and so on, they may have come in contact with that, but some of them may have never come in contact with those higher chakras. So it has to be a turning in, right? And so then we come to the 5th chakra, the Anahata, the heart chakra, which a lot of New Agers...
Oh, my heart chakra is fully opened up.
How many times in India have you heard that? My heart chakra is fully open, and then someone stands on their foot and they're like, ah, and they just go off their head, and it's like, well, don't know if you're in your heart chakra, kid, but anyway. Never make... See, this is the thing. If you dwell in the heart chakra, if you really do dwell in that psychological state, you would never make any grand statements about yourself, because you operate from a place of humility. And you know the sense of ego that you're trying to boost up is actually an illusion. So,
yeah, that's actually a big part of a spiritual practice in general, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not to make a statement about things and not make a certainty about your own inner world, the state of your inner world kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, for whatever reason, because I think a lot of people misunderstand Eastern philosophy and spirituality. A lot of people superimpose virtue signaling and spiritual one-upsmanship into Eastern philosophy, and that's a very Western mentality, where you have people trying to claim that they're more enlightened than other people and so forth and so on. And that's a very sort of, I mean, that would be laughed at if you did that in India or China or Southeast Asia.
Yeah, a lot of people will just scoff at
it. Oh, it'd be scoff, because it was just scoff-worthy. And as you know, with my channel, YouTube channel, I've had that a lot, where people will make grand statements as trying to be better than me. And I'm not saying I'm good at all, but I'm not sure why you're insecure and you're making those statements. Yeah. So I just teach the authentic traditions. And if that, fires you up, then maybe you are connected more to New Age thought and something for you to think about. So in saying that, the Anahata, the heart chakra, literally means not hit, right? Not hit. So that sounds strange, right? What does that mean? Not
hit, this hit?
Yeah, not hit. Yeah, not hit. And then, so that when you think about that, you think about that the old Zen koan of, do you know the sound of one hand clapping? Or do you know the sound of one hand? So you got to think about that, right? And so not hit means the sound of not two things striking, right? So it's not hitting anything.
So like there's no conflict.
There's no conflict.
Kind of
It's and there's no. This is the beginning of the down-regulation of separation. So there's no hit. So, and this relates to the sound of Om, right? Or let's be clear, Brahman. It relates to Brahman. So Brahman, the ultimate reality, is usually symbolized through Om, which a lot of people don't know. Om, yes. And then Om is often considered a 4-syllable word, which is very unique for people. But if you think about Om as A-U-M and then silence, then that's the way. We spoke about that in the Turiya podcast. And so that silent aspect is that deep silence after, like, say, Om, when you chant Om, is that not hit Anahata psychology. And so from this state, you sense that deep silence in the world. Your mind is not, like you said, you're not hitting things, you're not in conflict with things, because you live from the heart. Living from the heart means, what's the characteristics of living from the heart? Humility, trust, compassion, forgiveness, surrender. You're surrendering to life, you're trusting life.
Surrender is a big element, I think, because we all find it hard to do it, right? But surrender for something bigger than yourself.
Yes.
When you think of that, then we should be surrendering. We should be take on board, right?
But when you live in that psychology of the heart chakra, surrendering is not even hard, because it's your psychology.
That's right.
It's your way of being. It's like if you look at Wu-Wei in Taoism, if you look at the traditional perspective of Wu-Wei, of non-doing, non-forcing, non-allowing, allowing, then that is an act of trust and surrender. And from that place, life has its way. It's like in Shaivism, you become a limb of Shiva, right? Like, so, like Ramana Maharshi, what will happen, what won't happen. That's your mentality of life. So you live in that heart chakra. There's not, I've got to go out and take the world on and gain power, and I've got to experience this pleasurable experience. And you have completely you don't even know anything about that. Because your focus, not your focus, your psychology is surrender, is humility, is a complete understanding that the duality between you and Brahman doesn't exist. There's not this not hit. See, hit would be like Jiva, persona, and Brahman hitting, because there's that friction between the ultimate reality and Gayang, for example, right? Because you've bought into this illusion of separation and so forth and so on, that exists in the lower 3 chakras.
But from residing in Anahata, you actually gain that power, power of universe, Brahman, whatever you want to say, from surrendering to something bigger than yourself, and to have humility and to practice compassion and all these things. You actually gain that immense power within yourself, which are not comparable with anything, really.
No. And it's eclipsed when you're in the lower 3 chakras, what you're saying. So in your lower 3 chakras, that's eclipsed, and you don't have that power, because you're operating from the persona, you're operating from the jiva a lot. And so from the bottom 3, you go out and seek to gain power. Right? Yes.
But when you stay in the heart chakra, from surrendering yourself, from giving up everything and practice more of this humility, honesty, compassion, that power takes over you, right? So it's completely the other way around.
It's completely the other way around, yeah. And that's the thing, like when you get to that the Anahata Chakra, the fourth chakra, that's the turning in. That's the beginning of the turning in, instead of the looking out and trying to seek a life, not seek a life, seek pleasure and understanding in the outside world. When you start to turn in, you're seeking understanding and knowledge.
It's kind of up to the Manipura chakra that you want to like make a confirmation of your existence as a person in the world. But once you step up to Manipura, that kind of slowly deteriorates,
yes.
like slowly dissolving, slowly have no shape like anymore.
No. Yeah, when you're in that heart chakra, you're not acting out of those other chakras, right? And so they become like this background noise. Doesn't mean you can't fall back into them. You know, life sometimes has its way and people can fall back into those lower three chakras. But in general, if you reside a lot in that heart chakra, then there won't be like that energy pulling you back, because your life's starting to become shanti. You know, shanti in a certain way. You know, you're not fully there yet, but it's shanti in the sense that you have that understanding that, you know, I'm not running the show here. As you said, you're surrendered to a greater power, like what you said, and that can be called Brahman, Tao, or what have you, because that's what does you. You don't do it, to use Alan Watts' interpretation. And so you see the irony with the heart chakra, right, is that the defining characteristic is that you cease pursuing your own will and drive, which is unique, right? Which is an aspect of Buddhism. So when you look at Buddhism, you could say in some sense is a heart chakra science, because volition itself, they are telling you to suppress, or telling you to suppress it. You can say suppress, but like identify and realize that will is just going to lead to further suffering, right? And so you're trying to identify that and not move from that will or drive, whatever it is, and then your life comes back into bliss, shanti, you know, because even though your will or your drive to do something may seem pious or what have you, or you may seem like it's your virtue or your divine calling, it may not too. It may be an intuitive error. You may do something and the next minute, you know, people attack you or what have you. You know what I mean? Like anything can happen. Yeah. So the defining characteristic of the heart chakra is to cease pursuing your own will, which is unique, right? Like, and that is a method especially for sadhus and yogis, and that to get into the higher chakras, and likewise with Buddhism, the suppression of the will or the cessation of will or volition leads to nirvana. Is the path to nirvana. You know, you can't become a Buddhist monk if you're going to become a Buddhist monk and then you say, well, I'm going to become a story writer in tandem with being a Buddhist monk. It's like, that's not actually how it works. Like, I mean, you know, you're a Buddhist monk or you're a story writer. You take your pick. There isn't one better or worse. But if you're following what we're talking about in this chakra philosophy, then if you want to get to the higher chakras, then the suppression of the will or the cessation of will is important. So after the Anahata, now we come to the fifth chakra.
Yeah, it's only chosen one can go through.
The Vashuda Chakra, say located in the throat or the larynx. And the irony about this chakra in relation to the throat and the larynx is this is the chakra of purging. So almost like purgatory in some sense. So you're purging all of your vasanas and all your karma in this chakra. And we can dwell ordinarily in this chakra, like the fourth and the fifth, which we'll talk a bit about later. But so this chakra is mainly like we said, purging. So it's like the cleansing one, right? So you're cleaning all of your samskaras, all of your vasanas and karma comes from here. That's why when you go from the heart chakra to the throat chakra or the Vashuda Chakra, that's the dedication of the ascetic or the monk. You're very dedicated to your spiritual practice and ascending to the higher two chakras.
Yeah, it's interesting that how the throat is very small and narrow as well, right? So the only strong will survive.
Exactly.
Yeah, only strong will go through the throat chakra.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's almost like eliminating the idea of person. So once you practice surrender or humility in the heart chakra and have a thorough understanding of the spiritual path and spiritual understanding, and you go to the next step, which is throat chakra. And the reason why it's so difficult is that it's eliminating the idea of person itself is very difficult for anyone. And like you said, this chakra applies for like monks and sadhus and people who go through very intense spiritual practice, right?
Yes.
To completely get rid of that idea in dualistic ideas.
And like I said, ordinarily, like say for example, ordinary people like ourselves and everyone watching and so forth and so on, we can all experience the Vashuda Chakra because that's the chakra when you are doing actually sincere spiritual work. The difference is between, like what you said, like to go through that or just to live in the fourth and the fifth is a whole different ball game altogether. Because most people will never experience the sixth and seventh chakra. That's just the way it is, because of society and the way the world is set up. But we can dwell in the fourth and the fifth easy enough if we're turning our attention within. See, so the power of the third chakra, right? You know, the will to succeed. The interesting thing about the third is somewhat related to the fifth, because after going through the heart chakra, you still have a power in the fifth, but that will to succeed is oriented towards your spiritual practice and your evolution spiritually.
That strong desire, strong will.
Yes, it still exists, but it's much more of a virtuous will, because you're not concentrating then on conquering the world. You're concentrating on conquering yourself, so to speak. As you said, like you're trying to purge the person. You're doing that work to purge the jiva, essentially. So you're working on the samskaras, the vasanas, and karma. And so that discipline and that drive is turned in the Vashuda Chakra. So, and that's why most people watching and listening to us right now, and even ourselves, we probably all dwell in the fifth and the fourth.
Fourth and fifth, yeah.
Because we're doing the spiritual work and we are, in some sense, becoming better people, people that the world needs, as opposed to dwelling in the lower three chakras. And so that's the characteristic, right? The essential characteristic of Vashuda Chakra. And so you're basically purging yourself of all of these earthly limitations to experience Brahman. Because like if you're wound up in society, socialization, conditioning, even education and so forth and so on, what we have to all go through for whatever reason as a human being, they are what limits us as an individual. And I always harp on about this on the podcast. The individual itself is limited. The jiva is limited because it's a subjective view of the world. So when you live in a subjective view state, when you live in a subjective viewpoint, when you have a subjective viewpoint, you can't experience Brahman, because Brahman is beyond all duality, beyond all modes of subjectivity. And it's not, and we don't want to just say it's an objective viewpoint. We don't want to say anything like that. It's beyond even that. But it's about eliminating that sense of person, that subjectivity, realizing that you are part of the whole. And once you start to think in holistically, that's when you start to, crack the coconut, so to speak, and you start to get into the meat of existence and the sweet nectar.
You're breaking out of the eggshell kind of thing, isn't it?
Yes.
Like from the limited space to open space.
Yes.
To merge with something bigger.
They use the jar analogy in Vedanta, right? Like there's the space in the jar, and we are identifying with the jar, but as soon as you smash the jar, the space in the jar and the space outside the jar was the same. Right. And that's kind of what you're doing on the Vashuda Chakra is you're kind of cracking that jar to realize that you are one with Brahman, with the ultimate reality. And so you're essentially working on those samskaras, vasanas, and karma is working on earthly limitations, is working on all of those things that you've experienced that's created this limited sense of self that you believe you are, but then you're starting to downregulate that jiva to go to the high chakra. Yeah. So now we'll talk about the Arjuna Chakra, right? The
third eye.
The third eye. And there's a lot of New Age information on the third eye, obviously. That's one of the focus. Well, the heart chakra and the third eye is usually the main focus of New Age thought. And so the Arjuna Chakra, you would say, is kind of located in the pineal gland, and that's why we put the bindi here in Hinduism. The pineal gland is obviously Descartes will call the seat of the soul, and so forth and so on. It's always been spoke about in many traditions glowingly, because for whatever reason that seems to be what determines our connection to the divine within many spiritual traditions. And so what we're talking about here when we talk about the third eye is actually the vision of the ultimate reality, right? You witness it. You have the sense of unity or the sense of Brahman has come into your field of vision.
So that you are able to perceive the world from that place.
Yes.
Which is completely non-dual.
Yes. Which is completely non-dual.
Yeah.
But what's the problem here then, love? What's the problem here? You know what the problem is. The problem is there's still there is a subject.
Yeah, subject.
There's still someone who is witnessing it. Right? There's still like the great Mahavakya, I am Brahman.
Yep. There's still I there.
There's still I there, right? You need to be I am Brahman without the I. It just needs to be M Brahman. I don't even know if that makes any sense, but but then so you see that Jiva and Brahman are still separate. Actually, the right terminology to use here, which may get complicated for some people, with the Arjuna Chakra, is that you still, in a sense, are a jiva here. You've come into the field of Atman, but the reason why you're still jiva is because there's still a relationship to Brahman. And that's why they actually still have, from this chakra, they still have Brahman as Ishvara, as still being represented by something. So in Hindu context, like Vishnu or Shiva, right? So there's still, you still are on a relational level with Shiva or Vishnu as a jiva, but you're just wearing a t-shirt. You just got to take that's how easy it is in this chakra. You just got the jiva t-shirt on, you take it off, and there's Atman, and then you don't see, you don't have a visual representation of Brahman anymore. But that's the thing on this Arjuna Chakra. There still is that relational aspect. You still have there's still a visual representation of the vision of Brahman. It's like in the Bhagavad Gita when Krishna showed Arjuna the vision of Vishnu, and it was like it blew his mind because it was just beyond or comprehension, you know. So
yeah, so there is that still kind of seer and the seen.
yes,
that kind of thing.
it's still relational, right?
Yeah, there is a subject and object.
Yes.
What's been experienced, and there is the experiencer.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's still an object of knowledge. You see, there's still an object of knowledge. The object of knowledge has to disappear itself.
Yeah.
That's why they say in the Upanishads, you know, the one who knows the Brahman does not know the Brahman. The one who does not know the Brahman knows the Brahman. Because the one who doesn't know Brahman has dissolved all objects of knowledge. And there is no like self and other, you know.
There is no this knower.
There's no knower, yeah. You're just Brahman.
Yeah, you just are.
You just are.
Yeah.
And all tendencies and actions of being a person and acting from that place have completely dissolved. You become just a limb of Shiva or the aperture for the Tao to express itself in the world. That's what happens. And so at the third eye, and essentially, you know, it's important that they do call it the third eye, because the third eye is the vision, like Arjuna had the vision of the ultimate reality. But there's still, like you said, there's the seer and the seen. Now, let's clarify that. It doesn't mean that you're going to see, like what Arjuna said in the story, and you're going to see like millions of Vishnus. It means the sense of the ultimate reality within existence, the sense of Brahman there, and that feeling starting to overwhelm you in that chakra, right?
Yeah, like a world outside looks exactly the same.
Exactly the same, yeah.
But you are looking at the completely different degrees, different angle.
Yes.
So that you have that sense of Brahman in the environment or whatever have you outside of you.
Yes. Yes. That's one of the problems with New Age thought, right? They over-sensationalize things where they might read that story in the Bhagavad Gita and over-sensationalize it that you yourself are going to see that as well. And it's like, that's not how mythology works. It's designed symbolically for you to go to a deeper state. The deeper understanding is the sense of that feeling. It's not that you're going to see like Shiva chilling on the moon or something like that. That's not how it is.
Yeah, a lot of people misunderstand that you're going to actually physically see it.
Yeah, no. See, they're still material, right?
Yeah,
they're still possessed by materialism.
Yeah. Whereas it's purely, we're talking about levels of perception.
Yes. Levels of perception. That's the right on, because it's a sense that you have of, you know, Brahman is in all. But the problem is, from the Arjuna Chakra, is that there's still the I, as we said, like there's still the I am Brahman. And so obviously when we step into the 7th chakra, the Sahasrara chakra, which is one of the hardest Sanskrit words to say, which meaning the crown chakra, which up here, so half in and out, is translated as the 1,000 lotus petal. You know, if we translate it in that. And basically, the Sahasrara is really, you've transcended duality. It's the completion of one's spiritual journey into merging with Brahman. This would be, in some sense, the same as in yoga, right? With yug, with the meaning the merging with the divine. So this is the aspect of merging with the divine. So from this psychological state, you're beyond all duality. This would be the psychological state of the yogi or the sadhu or the spiritual master. And those that are obviously probably not the spiritual masters that you're probably thinking of, that are on, you know, YouTube and this and that, but the ones that are probably up in the Himalayas, away from everything, they experience this constantly, and there'd be a deep silence, and they probably wouldn't be, who knows how active those sorts of sadhus and yogis would be. We know that a lot of them aren't, but they just live in caves and so forth and so on.
Yeah, in Sahasrara, you have no identification with your physical body, your name or gender. nationality, all these things don't matter to you at all. Right?
They don't even exist for you.
It doesn't exist. And you purely reside in the Brahman world.
Yes. It's the end of the subject-object split. Yeah. So
like some spiritual teachers say that you are in a state of pure seeing.
Yeah.
There is no seer, there is no seen.
Yeah.
There is just a seeing.
Yes.
There is just a verb. Well, in Hindu
pure
philosophy,
awareness.
Yeah, that's right. In Hindu philosophy, the God is not a noun; it's a verb.
The verb, yeah.
The pure thing, the pure awareness.
You are basically the eyes of Brahman now, except there's no you there. Brahman is just seen through you in the crown chakra, and that's what that pure awareness is. That's what that Purusha is. Purusha meaning pure awareness, and awareness is probably better than saying. Say if we said pure seen, I know what you're saying, but someone might say, "Oh, if there's seen, there's someone seen." Right?
Yeah, that's right.
But there's just awareness. There's just like this light on, but there's nobody home. Yeah. The jiva's gone. All that's home is the pure awareness, is Brahman.
A lot of us may have experienced this state at crown chakra at a very small moment in our vipassana practice or something like that. When you go into quite a deep meditative state where there is nothing but to be aware, and that could be like as a moment of that kind of experience, right? There is only like stillness, darkness, and the breath, and there is no sensations, nothing really.
No mental activity, nothing.
Yeah.
Pure bliss.
Pure bliss. Completely empty in sunyata in Buddhism.
Well, that's what it's, and from that state is Ananda, right? So Ananda meaning, we have to clarify Ananda in Sanskrit doesn't mean bliss, it means unassociated bliss. So it's a bliss that's not associated with anything. It arises when there's no person there. And so there's no person there, and so naturally there's bliss. When there's a persona can think about things and it can become unhappy, and its bliss is often associated. Still in some sense in the heart and the throat chakra and the Vashuda and the heart chakra, your bliss in some sense can still be determined by association. But when you get into the higher chakras, and especially when you get into the Swarasthana chakra, is that it's the unassociated, because there's no person there. You've transcended duality. So the bliss is just natural. This is Satchidananda, right? Satchidananda. Existence, consciousness, bliss. You've completed, in some sense, the spiritual journey of the Upanishads, and that's what has happened. You've see, when you get to the crown chakra, there's no more relationship, right? Yeah. The ajna, there's still a relationship in the crown, in the third eye chakra. Yeah. Crown chakra, there's no relationship. You've become pure awareness, pure Brahman, and obviously pure bliss, because
that pure isness.
Yeah.
People say.
Yeah. Pure isness. Your life's not associated with things. It's not associated with experiences. That's what the Turiya is, right? Turiya is non-experience. It's a non-experiential reality. Yeah. So anything you can experience is obviously latent with suffering or happiness. But the non-experiential reality is just bliss, because there's no suffering, doesn't exist on that level. And that's the actual real level of all of the ultimate consciousness, the supreme consciousness, which is at the core of our being, which we would call Brahman or Tao or what have you. And so that is the essence of the crown chakra. And this is and the recognition in the crown chakra, if you've experienced it, or if you dwell psychologically there permanently, like some sadhus and yogis, is that there's a recognition that you were always it. You were always Brahman. Everything else was nonsense and an illusion. All of the suffering and arguments and conflicts and everything you went through in life, all of the identifications that you believed were you, all nonsense. Every little bit of it was nonsense. because you are always it. All of that is Maya. All of that is illusion, is measurement, is belief in labels, belief in anything that's of a dualistic nature.
Yeah, so in that state you're completely free from any kind of suffering and despair and misery.
Yeah.
None of that can exist.
No, it can't, because you're always it.
Yeah.
It's a recognition that you are always
That's
it.
right.
And a lot of us who dwell, say, in the second and third chakra, come to some certain conclusions that they were always it when it was too late. So when you're on your deathbed, and there's experiences of, like, obviously deep pain, but then there's experience. I don't know if many of you listening or watching have been around someone dying, but they ebb and flow through different states of, like, extreme pain because the physical body, but then they have extreme states of, like, recollection and joyousness, and like it ebbs and flows, like, and if you've ever been with someone who's just upon death, they usually have a sense of, like, it's okay, like they realize it's all good, like, for whatever reason, maybe to do with what we're talking about, but the recognition that they were always it, and the death, in some sense, if you haven't worked on the higher chakras and you've only dwelled in the third and you've only lived in the lower three chakras, then it's harder to let go of your ego upon death. Whereas if for a sadhu or a yogi or a spiritual master, they've dwelled in the higher two chakras, and it's not hard for them at all to let go, because they're just like, I was never here anyway. Yeah. Like when Ramana Maharishi's a disciple said, we say they were crying, like, we don't want you to go, and he's like, where am I going to go? The person was never here, but I will always be here. There's nowhere for me to go. Brahman is always ever present. You just don't see it because you're operating from the lower three chakras. You just don't see it. You can have a sense of that, as we spoke about, from the Anahata Chakra, from the heart chakra. You can have a sense of Brahman and that from that, because that's the beginning of the dissolution of the person. So you have a sense of there's not just, my life is not just determined by what happens externally to myself. So
it's really good.
Yeah. So we went through all of them.
Yeah, really good. I really like it because it actually gives you good a framework of, like, your spiritual practice. And I mean, you don't have to know, I don't think. No. But when you actually know it, it gives you kind of a good map in your head, these psychological centers and the levels and energetic levels and within yourself, and how you can make a connection with these chakra points. It gives you good framework, I think.
Yes. And you need a framework, right? We harp on about this all the time on the podcast. Like, a lot of people who fall into New Age woo-woo philosophy is they don't have any framework to understand the spiritual path. And you do need. Like, and I think chakra philosophy, the philosophy of the system, is one of the great ones. Yeah,
and it gives you a good reference, isn't it?
Yeah, it does.
You can reflect on your state of mind, your state of psychology.
Yes.
And you can reflect on these chakra system.
And if you know a lot about it, you know where you are residing in a certain point in time. And you know then that it's not so much that you are a depressed person or so forth and so on. It means that you've fallen prey to a certain psychological state that binds you to a lower chakra. So maybe there was one point in your life where you were seeking a lot of sex or whatever, and you were wondering why you were always in a sort of a low state of consciousness. Like, it's not that sex is bad or not that sex isn't important. Sex is important and there's nothing wrong with sex, but if you're constantly dwelling in that second chakra, the Schwarzschild Chakra, then you're constantly seeking pleasure, which will often is the case that you're avoiding some sort of suffering or pain that you haven't dealt with. And so when you understand this system, as you were saying, is that it gives you a framework of understanding. It gives you the ability to say, I know why I'm here now, and I know what I have to do to get out of it. But if you don't know, then you may just keep eating McDonald's and, you know, going to the brothel or what have you. You know what I mean? Like, but if you understand, then you know that I have to take control of my life a bit more and go deeper into my spiritual practice.
And when we talk about energy is something to do with the physicality, and it's also limited, I believe. So that how we use the energy well is also very important to the practice as well. That kind of, we might burn ourselves out focusing too much on pleasurable experience, then that'll kind of eliminate the opportunity to focus on, to move on to the upper chakras, right? So that kind of redirecting our energy and focus in the upper chakra so that you can kind of help yourself stay out of the lower three chakras. So I think that balance on using the energy appropriately is also very important.
It is.
Yeah. It could be like just your habitual things you do every day, or the food that you consume is part of energy as well, and information that you also consume, all these things, knowledge, everything that we take in through our senses, the energy and how we use them wisely is very important to rise up through the spine.
Yes. Well, if you look at it like what you're saying, if you look at even the sitting practice of meditation, right? What are you doing in the sitting practice of meditation? You're turning your prana back in on itself, on yourself. You're not expelling your energy out. You know, you're harnessing it and you're guiding it towards higher knowledge, higher understanding, and essentially through blockages through your own system, in a sense, right? If we look at our being as psychosomatically, so you know, even if we look at it from the Taoist three treasures tradition of Jing, Qi, and Shen, Jing being the battery or the power base, the genetic blueprint we got from our parents that slowly burns out through our life. If you're constantly putting your energy out here, that Jing burns out a lot quicker than it would if you were harnessing it through spiritual practice. You know, having herbs and eating healthy food and so forth and so on. So, I mean, these systems are holistic systems to try and harness the energy. So not just for longevity, but also for spiritual understanding and eventual enlightenment. That's what it's about. But the problem is, like what you're saying, if you're on the second chakra or the third chakra, you're expelling a lot of energy, and that is just burning you out, and you're spending it in the wrong way.
And like I said, it's limited.
Of course it's limited. Yeah,
so that you will just get burnt out, and there's no way you can get out of it eventually. You can fall into that trap, right?
Yeah. I mean, people die young, right? They die young because, in some sense, their system is burnt out. Not in all cases, but like, say with heart failure or something like this, is you're not taking care of the system properly. You need to understand the psychosomatic organism as a system, and when you understand that system, you don't want to burn that out. It's like if you have a car, right? You're not going to have your foot on the floor, on the accelerator on the car, and think that the car is going to be functioning tip-top for a long time. It just can't.
Yeah.
It just can't. So when you're dwelling, especially on the second and third chakra, that's kind of like the foot on the floor, because you're seeking pleasure all the time. You're seeking influence and power in subtle ways, and sometimes in very obvious ways for some people, like politicians. But there's this constant game going on, and it's all geared towards self-interest, geared towards pleasure and power and so forth and so on. And so you're constantly burning that system out quicker than if someone was living on the fourth and fifth chakra and were harnessing their energy and guiding it towards higher chakras. This is where the Kundalini comes in, right? when the Kundalini's awakened and going through a process of going through the higher chakras, it means that energy, that dormant energy, is not being expelled just within the lower 3 chakras. And so that's it, when your consciousness becomes even more and more and more awakened and enlightened, you know. So, and it's like what you said, it's all energy, right? Yes. It's all about energy, allocation of energy, where we're putting it. Yes. And like we have to think, like what we mentioned at the start of the podcast, we have to think of energy not in the New Age context, but within the traditional context. Yeah. So, and in this context, it's psychoenergetic. It's about the psychological energy. You know, it's like when you practice, like, you know, when you practice meditation, right? Or you practice where you want to put your chi. How do you practice that? It's where your mind's awareness goes within your body.
Yeah, isn't it so interesting that like they did some like a scientific study on like for example cancer patients and all that. They did experiment on someone who has a cancer, and they put like ultrasound, so you can see the lumps, the cancer cells in the body, while that person was focusing, like doing a deep stillness meditation. So for that moment, that the cancer cells were kind of shrunk in size. So that's to show like how much the focus and the awareness we give to certain things, certain part of our mind, it has such immense impact. Yeah, that's just amazing. So that's to show how important to use our energy wisely.
Yeah, it's just so powerful. You see, the thing is, like, when you're moving, again, prana and chi around your body, it's your mind that guides it. You know what I mean? If you're a skilled practitioner, right? Like, I've heard from teachers in India, like, saying that when you have an injury, guide your prana to the injured place, and you watch it heal a lot quicker, and so forth and so on.
This is amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah. I'm not saying that that's definitely going to help certain other injuries, but if it's a niggling injury or something like that, for sure. Yeah. But obviously, if it's a broken leg, that's not going to do anything. But
that's to also goes the other way around. Like when we're stressful, weak part of our body gets more gets weaker and weaker, and end up causing bigger problem, right?
Yes,
so how stress hormone creates more problem within the body. It works the other way around, the same.
It's the same,
so that's kind of a clear evidence.
Well, stress, you could say, it results from a lack of awareness, right? A lack of higher awareness, because the external world is dictating to you, and you are overwhelmed by it.
And you let it kind of take over you.
But then when you bring more awareness to the stress, then you can feel actually your body begin to loosen up.
That's right.
You know, and in Vipassana, especially when you do sitting meditation, and you guide people to feel through those sensations that they feel in the body. After it, they feel a sense of like deep ease. You know what I mean, within their being. You know, not just their body, but also in their mind. And that's just the skill of putting the awareness where it needs to be within the body. And so, that's the magic of prana and chi, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, psychologically and physically lightened.
Yeah. You are lighter. Yeah.
Lighter. Yeah.
So you are sort of enlightened. As they say. It can have something to do with weight, right?
Yeah.
So, and wrapping it up, like I said, most people dwell in the second and third chakra. It doesn't mean people are bad people in general. It means that the way we've structured our society and the way we are conditioned from a young age is to seek power, to seek pleasure, and to avoid pain. And that's how we have designed the world, which is very unique, actually, when you look back through evolution, because it's a pretty recent phenomenon for humans to live like that. We didn't have the opportunity to have a lot of pleasure and stuff like that back in the day. You couldn't just walk outside your home and get a coffee and have a chocolate cake. It's impossible back in the day, right? If you knew someone had a chocolate cake, you'd travel probably 1,000 miles to go and see them, you know? So back in the time. So and sex wasn't readily available, and so forth and so on, right? So doesn't mean majority of us are bad people. It just means that that's the way society is structured. But the transition would be going from, as I said, dwelling in the fourth and fifth, in the Anahata and the Vashuda, the heart chakra and the throat chakra, where we would have understanding of everyone, right? There would be compassion, forgiveness, humility. There would be more humility, honesty, respect would be from that place. But instead, we see in the world, we see this game of conflict and he said, she said, and so forth and so on. And so, and last thing, the sixth and seventh chakra is something that most of us probably will never experience. And it's something that only the very sincere in their spiritual practice will experience. And so that's why you've only seen a few Buddhas and you've only seen a few Patanjalis and, so forth and so on. There's probably been a lot more than what you think. You just don't, they're not advertised on YouTube.
You don't get to see or hear about it, about those people.
Yes, so. Because they're doing the real work. Like you and I know, you just walk around the Himalayas, walking in the Mustang area, and there's just a sadhu living up in a Tibetan plateau, and you're like, what the hell? Like the nearest town's like 100 kilometers away. How's he eating? And anyway, but that's where they are, and that's the work that they're doing. So, but it's not to say that any of us can't experience that. You can. It's a matter of sincerity in your spiritual practice.
And the determination, rigorous determination.
You got to have that bodhicitta, like they say in Buddhism. You got to have that real, sincere determination. You always hear the Dalai Lama talk about bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is important to get into those higher states of consciousness. Yeah. So just as much energy you put into becoming famous and relevant, you put into becoming enlightened.
Yes.
But in the Vashuda Chakra, it's a different motivation, right?
That's right.
The motivation is different. So we unpacked that, and hope you guys all enjoyed. Leave a comment below. Let me know. Tell me, which chakra you live on. Just jokes, people, jokes. But leave a comment. Make sure you like, subscribe, everything like that. It helps us out immensely, and we are very happy that you guys are enjoying the podcast. Definitely. Guy Young enjoys a lot. Yeah. You enjoy reading the comments, and
yeah, definitely. I appreciate all the listeners really take on board on the content of what we're talking about, so which is really good. It means a lot.
Yeah. It's fun.
Yeah,
it's fun. So, anyway, hope you guys are doing well, and we'll see you guys next week.